This lottery-funded project brought together people from different ages and backgrounds to talk about events that shape their lives or those they care for. The one thing they all have in common is living in a world with an experience of learning disability. How we acknowledge and view adults with learning disabilities has changed over time and is set within the context of knowledge, understanding, awareness and experience, both in terms of society at large and for individuals. This film explores the impact of the external world on adults with learning disabilities from different generations and how they have individually, or with the support of family, carers or support agencies, sought and maintained their independence in early life, education, health and housing.
I was born just in the 70s, well, the start of the 70s. And when I was first born, obviously you didn't have any scans and all of those sort of monitoring things. And then, so when I was actually born, my parents, they knew I had some sort of disability, but they didn't know what it was. And basically my parents were told that she will never walk, she will never talk, she won't be able to do anything. The only thing we ever got was a teacher from the deaf came and taught my mum how, to sort of stimulate me and all of that sort of stuff. But why it was a teacher for the deaf, we don't know. I asked my mum that a few years ago and she said she never knew. She didn't know why that was. And then I went away because I've got a visual impairment. I actually went away to school at the age of 4 years old, which obviously broke my parents' heart to send me away. And they were actually going to move to Newcastle with me, but the social worker said that was one of the worst things they could have actually done. And thinking back on it, I think it's been the best thing that they did, because it taught me, independence. It taught me, how to make friendships, have relationships, and just go out and do things. So I think it did actually. I think it has made me the person that I am now, I think.
My name's Wendy Davidson and I am the mother of a young woman, Laura, who has learning disability. And through her learning disability we've been introduced to a world that we knew very little about. And our experience has been very mixed. But our experience didn't start when she was born, because we didn't know about her learning disability immediately. It's been a gradual process, and it came about through her not reaching the usual developmental milestones, and this led to various tests, which resulted in a blood test which showed that she had a chromosome abnormality, which, as the doctor put it, may lead to some developmental delay. And his parting shot as he left the room was, she should have a reasonable standard of life.
When I was about 18 months old, I fell out of an upstairs bedroom window and split my head open. And the causes are I got learning disabilities, it was to do with me slight brain injury, but I think that was the cause of it, because when I got older I used to struggle in school with reading, writing and doing everyday task stuff.
When I was 12 my mum got pregnant, and I had a sister, Anna, who had Down syndrome, and she had a hole in her heart, and so she was very poorly when she was first born. And she had a lot of chest complications and things like that. But it was through Anna that then I got to know about the world of what happened with children with Down syndrome, although I suppose at age 12 I just thought she was my sister and that was the end of it, although I knew that she'd been quite poorly when she was born. And she used to go off to toy libraries and things like that. And there was a special school in our area, it's just actually down the road from where we lived. And so Anna would have gone there had she lived long enough, but unfortunately she died just before she was 4, and and she died because she had a hole in the heart, but she couldn't get an operation for that at the time.
I left home in 1963. I was only 8. I went to Devonby. I was in there for 14 years. I was put in there because I challenged behaviour.
I was very angry that I thought it was completely unfair that she hadn't been able to get an operation, and it wasn't right, that some people should be treated differently. And I knew by that time that disabled people were treated differently, and people with learning difficulties and people with Down syndrome. And I thought it just wasn't right.
The school that I was in was quite a small school, whereas even if you weren't in the same class, everybody knew everybody else. It was that kind of school. And the classrooms were smaller as well. You maybe only had about maybe 10, 12 in a class. So of course, it was better. It was sort of better, I think.
The first year at school was absolutely horrendous. I can't believe it actually happened. I don't know how I got through that year, because she went into mainstream school. I was recommended this school. We lived out in the country, so we went to this school. Quite a big school, but the teacher's way of teaching Laura, but it actually was dealing with her, was she spent most of the first year up in the staff room with a teaching assistant. She wouldn't have her in the classroom. So, and then I found out about that. So, and lots of other things happened. She wouldn't even let her bring a reading book home. Well, like all the other children were coming out with the reading bags, and I used to say, well, where's Laura's? No, she's not ready to read yet. And she just used to blank me. She just didn't want Laura there, basically. So we moved schools.
I mean, I'm not knocking where other schools, sort of mainstream schools, but my thing is, and this is, my thing is if people can cope in a mainstream school, send them into a mainstream school if you feel they could cope in that. But I know that I probably wouldn't have coped in that environment, I don't think.
She'd only been at the new school, a little small country school, for a couple of weeks when the teacher came running out to me the next day and said, she says, I just wanted you to come in and see something. She said, anybody that tells you that Laura cannot read, she says, you want to watch this? And she had some items laid out on the table. There was a car and a ball and something else. Can't remember what it was. And then the words in writing, which were all mixed up. And she asked Laura to put the right word with the right item. Excuse me. So she asked Laura to put the right word with the right item, and Laura did it immediately. And she says that proves she can recognise words, and that is the first basis of reading. And that teacher restored a lot of faith I had in the teaching profession, because before that I just thought, this is going to be, and basically Laura was 4 at this time, so to lose faith in an education system when they're 4 years old, you've got a long way ahead.
I mean, I was just speaking to somebody very, very recently who I went to school with, and whereas years ago you had to fight to get people into mainstream school and people would go to special school, whereas now it seems to have gone the other way. You have to fight to get your kid into a special school because they just want everybody to go into mainstream schools. Which, yeah, but I think these things need to be done properly. I really do think if people can cope in a mainstream school, then fair enough. But I think a lot of that, and people I've spoken with and stuff, is sometimes people get the help they need, and then because of the lack of funding, it gets withdrawn, and then they end up at square one again.
I used to when I used to get taught off the special need teacher when I used to be in the class a wee while to listen to stuff, and then I used to be taken out of class, and in the hallway I had a table where I used to sit at with the teacher. It was there was a classroom there and the cloakroom there, but I had a desk, and it used to draw attention to us, and when people used to comment on it, and I just felt singled out.
The first night I went into Devonby, I got upset. I didn't want to go in.
We had Devonby Hall in Cumbria, and I suppose that was quite a small institution in some ways, but there were some really big institutions right across the UK and certainly up in Scotland and so on. And the regimes of the institutions were where people were basically dehumanised. So I can remember living in Colchester and hearing tales about the institution there where men would have been grouped outside and showered down, you know, because that would have been their equivalent of a bath or whatever. And I remember stories just from people that I've worked with in the advocacy group over the last 20 years or so, talking about lining up for their baths, you know, and they would be in the bath water one after the other, they would be standing naked in a line, they would be being watched over.
They thought it was a home, but I knew it wasn't. It was a hospital, and I didn't want to stay in there because I wasn't ill.
There's a gentleman I know, Daniel Doherty, lived in Manchester, and he talked about how he said it was first up, best dressed, and that's because all the clothes were kind of in one cupboard. So if you got up first, you could kind of pick and choose what you were going to wear for the day, but if you were the last into the cupboard, then you just got what was left over.
They said I had to go in. And then everything turned upside down.
They were total institutions in the way that everything was on site. So people lived there, they slept there, they ate there. There were gardens there, so all of the vegetables and things were grown there that were eaten. There were farms. A gentleman that I know, Andy, he worked in the tailor shop in the institution that he was in, so they made suits there for people to wear. The dentist was on site. You know, there was no reason for anyone to actually leave the institution once they were inside it.
I didn't know where I was upset. It took so much out of me that day about being in there. Because I didn't know where I was until they told me. And then they put me actually in a wet bed. I was distraught. And I couldn't bear it, so I got out of it, and it just tore.
I wouldn't say we've closed our eyes to it, but because I've never been in it, probably, if I'd have been maybe born maybe earlier, I think I would have still escaped it, because my parents probably would have fought tooth and nail not to have me being sent to an institution.
They put me in a side room. You know what the side room is? It's like put a board on the window and it makes it dark. And then I went on to E1. That's the punishment ward. That's punishment ward, E1. They made me scrub floors. Put me to bed, but nothing. No tea, no supper. Because I didn't do what they said.
A diagnosis can be a double-edged sword. So for the person who the diagnosis might be useful for, because once you get it, then that opens doors of resources and support that you can get that's going to be individualised, personalised to you and help you on your way and enabling. So that's good. But then for the person, the bad side of it might be you get the diagnosis, but then you're also labelled because you have that diagnosis.
There's a big issue sometimes with labels and people's diagnosis. Fine, that might help in some respects, and it's more to do with the the professionals and the categories that they need to help provide support and needs. But for parents, I'm not sure if it helps or not.
And then it can be a relief. I mean, in that Witness to Change book, there's an interview in there about a young man whose mum was really supportive of him, whose family were great, but he was always seen as trouble by other people. And she knew there was something, and they had a really difficult life. And then eventually, when he was much older, he got his diagnosis, and it was a rare kind of syndrome. And the relief that she felt was like she felt vindicated, because all along she'd known that there was something going on that was out of his control, that it wasn't him being a bad person, but the reaction from other people was that he was bad, and therefore she was a bad parent. So it was really great that they got that diagnosis.
It's a very broad term. I mean, I still wouldn't ever try to say what normal was or what average was. So why try to define what learning disabled is? Because it covers a huge range and a very varied group of people.
I went into a daycare centre for people with disabilities up at Glenmore Opportunities up at Harker, the Heathlands project. Well, a course came up within that called My Life, Your Job, but there was two sides to it. Well, one side was for a teaching qualification called Petals, Preparing to Teach in the Lifelong Learning Sector. There was two of us that did it up at Heathlands, me and my friend, but it was what you need for teaching on the first part of the ladder to get into the teaching business, and went on, done it. It's normally a short time course to do it, but we got it extended to over a year to do it. But I was the first one in England with a mainstream to get it a mainstream teaching qualification.
Laura went down to mainstream secondary school, which had a strategic unit, which meant that she was educated in one part of the school but was linked to the mainstream school. And this was another example of how inclusion was meant to work at the time, that she would be included in opportunities that other people would have, which was what we wanted. And one of the things that she volunteered for was to go on a skiing trip. So I was quite apprehensive about this, because she'd never skied before, nor did she have good balance, plus the fact she hadn't really been away very much on her own before, although support would be put in place. And, let alone let her go to another country on a coach trip. But she decided she wanted to go, so we supported that.
And then with that, what else we did, because the project ran for 3 years, My Life, Your Job, we worked to write a human rights pact to teach.
And the school convinced us that they would provide the right support. So off she went to Italy on a coach, travelling for a day and a half. I spent 5 days in Italy learning how to ski. And I have seen the video evidence that she did manage to do that. So I was very proud of her. And it just goes to show what you can do given an opportunity with all the right support things in place. And she still talks about that holiday and still has photographs of that holiday that she shares with people, because that was probably one of her special moments.
First, it was to teach people with disabilities how they should be treated. The two articles were focused on mainly was right to relationship and marriage and freedom of expression, because they're the two when you've got a learning disability or mental health issue that you're not listened to.
I think there's still a lot of bullying, and we know that there's lots of hate crime that happens against disabled people still. So I think there is a level of that still goes on. I think the government is prejudiced about the way that they treat disabled people, and I think all the stuff that's happened around benefits and welfare cuts and everything has been morally wrong. So that must be based on prejudice and stigma against people who are disabled.
I think it has got better, but I do think there's a few people that still need to understand people with disabilities, that they're still human beings, because I see it myself. I've heard people's comments before saying, "Oh well, they should be locked away out of society," and that isn't the case. People should be not tolerant of people with learning disabilities, but just treat them as a human being, because they just don't know what's around the corner themselves. They could grow, when they grow old, they could get dementia, and would they like someone to say, "Oh well, they've got dementia, they should be locked away"? They should think what they're saying. It's not just people's feelings, it's people's lives they're playing with.
There's a phrase you often, I've seen in newspapers before, where somebody's describing somebody with a learning disability, and a typical example would be maybe autism, and they're talking about this person who suffers with autism. Who's made that assumption that it's suffering? No, they live with autism, and that might be a label, but why suffer? That is just, yeah, and I don't feel that is acceptable. That is totally a lack of understanding of what learning disability is, or what that particular condition is. Ask the person first. Do they feel they suffer with autism? I would have thought no, they live with it.
I think we just need to just accept people for who they are. And I think we need to do away with all of these crazy benefits that stigmatise people, and then you can't even get them. It's just crazy. Why not? I mean, there's some ideas I heard recently about everybody. I think they're doing it in one of the European countries, I can't remember, but it's like everybody just gets like money to live on, and then everything works out from that basis. So then you don't have to be stigmatised with some horrible diagnosis that other people are going to think there's something strange about you. And then I suppose it would just be useful to know what your needs are, so that your needs can be supported, so that you can live a full life and have a right to a full life like anybody else.
I enjoy what things that I do now. I am independent now on my own. As I said, I go out when I want, I can come in when I want, I've got my own key, I've got my own flat. So everything for my life now is wonderful. It's so wonderful now for me.
Disabled children are there, and they get all this help and support, and then you move into adult services and there's a rug pull from beneath you. People become invisible, and that's not right. So we actually set up our own little support group as a group of parents, because we felt that the support that they needed in adult services wasn't there, to allow our sons and daughters to go out and enjoy everyday stuff. And that could be just going down to the local leisure club, it could be just going out for a bar meal, because these are things that our sons and daughters can't do independently.